In March 2020, India came to a grinding halt. And while we were coming to terms with our new reality, India's invisible workforce that quietly drives the economy was facing a crisis. The cab driver, the newspaper guy, the house help, the factory worker. Millions of migrant workers, the people who not just build our homes but our entire lives, left without work, cash, and food. More so, left without the dignity of anyone knowing where they were and how they were, till they started walking. The visuals left us asking, why didn't we know better? We should have. But the truth is, even today, we know little about migration within our own borders. In a country where close to 30% people migrate, shifting villages, cities, and states to earn a living, not having an understanding of who goes where, when, and why impedes our ability to plan for the welfare of around 400 million migrant Indians. Omidiyar Network India presents the Indian Express Think, Decoding India's Internal Migration, a series of solution-oriented conversations with thought leaders to discuss key issues that enable us to know better and plan better, and most importantly, help us improve the economic and social conditions of our migrant workforce, the workforce that keeps us going.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Indian Express Group, a very warm welcome to the Indian Express Think series on migration presented by the Omidiyar Network India. Indian Express IE Think is a series of, I'm sorry, just 1 second. I seem to have lost my track. IE Think is a forum that brings together thought leaders, policymakers, and corporate leaders to encourage a substantive exchange of ideas and get the best minds to give it directions and solutions. Previously, the migration series has focused on the need for research and tracking of migration data, the responsibility of the governments in both the home and destination states, the health crisis affecting the migrant workers, how to mainstream the concerns of migrant workers on what policy can do to create livelihoods, what can be done to improve housing for migrants, and on the impact that internal migration has on women and children. Today, we shift the focus to migrant workers and the promise of eShram. The session will feature a special keynote address and an insightful panel discussion. Please join me in welcoming our guest today. Our keynote speaker, Shri Bhupender Yadav, Minister of Labour and Employment and Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Our panelists today, Ashif Sheikh, who is the founder and CEO of Jan Sahas, Chandan Kumar, National Organizing Secretary of the Working People's Coalition, Divya Verma, Program Manager at the Center for Migration and Labour Solutions, Ajivika Bureau, Govindraj Ethiraj, Senior Journalist and Founder, India Spend. We also have Sanjay Avasthi, India Head of Office, International Organization for Migration. The session today will be moderated by Udit Mishra, Deputy Associate Editor, The Indian Express. Please remain connected through the session on social media too, audience. You can use the hashtag Migration in India. Before we proceed, there is a short video clip that we would like to share on India's migration from the Omidiyar Network India. Thank you for that. May I now request Udit Mishra to please share the introductory note with us.
Thanks, Pooja. Hello and welcome to another edition of the IE Think Migration webinar series, which the Indian Express is organizing along with the Media Network India. As some of you at least would have known, who have seen the past episodes, that since last March, we've been running this webinar series, hoping to look at different aspects of India's internal migration, partly because it is very little is known about it, very little, even less is actually understood about it. And as the COVID lockdowns and the reverse migration showed, it seemed like the policy framework or the framework within which we look at migrants was woefully inadequate in terms of understanding their needs and providing some solutions. So the idea behind the whole series is to inform ourselves and our readers, and also to somehow work as change agents, trying to bring about some kind of a solutions-oriented approach to dealing with migration and migrant workers. In the past, as Pooja also alluded to, we've looked at various aspects. I was looking at the past episodes and we've looked at health and how COVID impacted the health of migrant workers. We've looked at the needs that migrant workers have to somehow boost their livelihood opportunities. We've looked at their housing needs. We've also had an episode, a very insightful episode, to look at what were the specific demands for migrant women and children, and remarkable insights in that episode. But one thing that has perhaps, which is perhaps the biggest issue, is that considering that migrant workers are from a relatively marginalized part, they are economically deprived and weak. Social security is one big issue that needs to be discussed. Now, as we know, there is no specific one direct policy for migrant workers. But last year, the government of India came up with eShram portal. And this was a big initiative because it was through eShram that the government wanted to create a database for informal sector workers. And there is a huge gap between informal sector workers and migrant workers that we talk about. Typically, people migrating from one state to another or within the state itself, or even within the district, are often working in the informal sector, and very little is known about their employment and their social security. And the idea with eShram was that eShram will perhaps be this massive database which will enable the government to do a lot of things. Now, today's episode is dedicated to eShram. And what is the promise of eShram? What is eShram trying to do? What is the ground reality as of now? And how it might be improved over time, and what all needs to be done for eShram to work for migrant workers. Now, before we start off with a panel discussion with people who actually work with migrant workers or who observe them at a macro level, let's first hear the government's view. So let's first hear from the Minister for Labour and Employment, Mr. Bhupen Yadav, on what he has to say about eShram.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by thanking the Indian Express Group for inviting me to this event and extending the opportunity to speak on the theme of migration and how eShram, the first comprehensive national database of unorganized workers in the country, is a game changer. As we enter the Amrit Kal of India's independence, the country, under the visionary leadership of Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi, is marching toward the goal of an advanced, inclusive and sustainable economy. Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas remains our vision. No Indian should be left behind in the development and growth of that our people are aspiring for, and that is their right. An important aspect toward realization of the vision is targeted the last mile delivery of the welfare scheme for crore of Indians, including the nation builders, our unorganized workers. To this vision, The eShram as a national database of unorganized workers across the country has launched on 26 August to achieve registration and collection of relevant data for approx 38 crore unorganized workers in the country. And I am happy to inform that eShram has already completed registration of approximately 28 crore unorganized workers within a span of 8 months. Focusing on the theme, now I will touch upon as how eShram registration and data collection process work in the context of migration. One of the major aims of eShram is to provide social security benefit and much needed help to the vulnerable organized sector workers during pandemic or natural calamities. To identify the migration pattern and the migrant worker within the organized worker group, eShram has devised a set of procedures in this respect. Comparison of the permanent and present address field with the eShram database for all the registered unorganized workers in eShram. This shall give us identification of the migrant if there is a difference in the state, district of permanent and present address fields of the unorganized worker. We have sent SMS to the workers registered on eShram requesting them to update their present address field along with any other occupation or demographic detail which may have changed. In this conjunction of the process told earlier shall help in migrant worker identification. We are in the process of integration of eShram with chatbots through which unorganized worker can share their broad location to the present address from their phone with us. The shared location when compared with the permanent address state, district field is advised to identify migrant worker within the eShram database. We are also in the process of integration of eShram with One Nation, One Ration Card of Department of Food and Public Distribution based on the location data of monthly food grain collection PDS shop. It is advised that a comparison of this location data with the permanent address data in eShram shall help identify the migrant worker within eShram. The next question which then arises, how will eShram address the issue migrant worker face in accessing social security entitlement? This is the major issue. To ensure the location of worker is not hindrance of the social security benefit. Let me tell you, we are in process of integration of eShram database with various state government and their respective labor departments. Second, eShram shall share all relevant and shareable data with the state governments in a dynamic way through API based integration. Based on the migrant worker home state and the migrated state, the relevant data of each worker shall be shared. Thereby, each state government may be able to provide benefit to the state government scheme designed for each occupation category or income or other specially designed scheme. In addition to this, the Government of India bring out various schemes for unorganized workers from time to time. Benefit of all those shall also be endowed to the eligible unorganized worker category. The government has running information campaign to the analyst and empower the unorganized workers across all its relevant DBT scheme. We, in conjunction to state governments, also plan to send DBT scheme related SMS to the migrant worker for better accessibility of the social security scheme of both state and central government. Let me now focus how Digital India has helped eShram in a big way. The Government of India has done tremendous achievement in terms of removing digital divide and digital literacy in the last 7-8 years. A few examples in this regard will make this more evident. Number 1. According to an estimation, India is poised to become the second largest country in terms of mobile phone users pegged at a subscriber base of 120 crore. Out of this, about 75 crores are smartphone users. Second, India has the second largest mobile data internet subscriber base. Third, India has also one of the most affordable and least cost per GB of data available. In addition to these three, we have a huge network of over 4 lakh common service centers, 16,538 state seva kendra, and a wide network of post offices spanning across the length and breadth of the country. Today, all these infrastructures help us reach to farthest corner of the country and enable the citizens to make full use of available digital technology. We have utilized the CSC SSK network for registration, the mobile subscriber base for informing and collecting data through registration forms in self-registration mode. We have reached to farthest corner of the country in the hills and forests of the inclusive data collection through mobile vans. eShram has leveraged these available infrastructures to create an ecosystem wherein every unorganized worker will feel informed and empowered about their rights and the government support available to him, her in the time of need. eShram is in near future will play a pivotal role in building a social security architecture for the unorganized and informal workers in the country. These workers form the backbone of our economy, given their hardship and labor-intensive work. On the other hand, they are one of the most vulnerable sections of our society. The government has a responsibility to address their issue and strives to accomplish the same through eShram. We have given a unique identity to each of the unorganized worker in terms of universal account number that will be acceptable, recognized and shall be unique throughout the lifetime of unorganized worker. This shall provide them with opportunities of receiving benefits of government scheme, that is donate a pension, Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandhan, PMSBY and many other schemes released by state and central government from time to time. eShram has already been integrated with National Career Service, the most popular NCS portal of our ministry, which is creating ample opportunities for these workers registered on eShram to search for jobs or great search by employers. We are advising provision of international job instincts through eShram integration with NCS and Migrant. eShram is in the process of integration with Asim and Udyam portals to provide skill development and entrepreneurial support to unorganized worker. These both Udyam and Asim belongs to Ministry of Small Scale Industry and the Skill Ministry. We have leveraged the Digital India initiative along with the Aadhaar and Pradhan Mantri Janadhan Yojana to create an integrated and self-sustaining social security architecture. With this framework, all the benefit scheme for unorganized workers can be seamlessly delivered to the last eligible beneficiary. Hence, shall give an opportunity to our sisters and brothers working in unorganized sector to participate in the next level of growth trajectory of India. To conclude, I would like to say that 21st century belongs to India with inclusive growth and development for one and all, and the government under Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji is committed toward the welfare of our Shram Yogis, our nation builders. Thank you all for your such patient listeners. Shramev Jayate, Jai Hind.
I thank the Minister for that message on Keynote. That was a very illuminating keynote speech on eShram. From what I understand, already 28 crore registrations have happened. That's 280 million. The target being 380 million. And he also talked about a lot of interaction between the central government and the state governments. He talked about eShram being having the ability to spot migration patterns, spot migrants, looking at their addresses and updation. And he talked about how one of the chief objectives with eShram is that it hopes to provide social security to the vulnerable, and that there'll be a lot of data sharing and collaboration between the center and state governments to, both the home states and destination states, to figure out which migrant needs what kind of support, and providing them at the place where they are, whatever be their current address. And he also talked about the leveraging of the Digital India framework, which has many aspects. Without any further delay, let's start the panel discussion. We have a very exciting panel. Welcome to the panel, Mr. Chandan Kumar, who's from the Working People's Coalition, Ms. Divya Verma from Ajivika Bureau, Mr. Asif Sheikh from Jan Sahas, and Mr. Sanjay Avasthi from International Organization for Migration, and Mr. Govindraj Yatiraj, who's a senior journalist and founder for India Spend. So, as many of you also heard, it's a very ambitious program, and the idea behind eShram is that it will it's not just something which is working as an isolation, as a central scheme or a central portal. It will sort of interact in a very dynamic manner and will have massive impacts, and it already has 280 million registrations. Now, my first question, and that will go across the panel, is to get a sense, because all of you work on the ground and have your own lived experience and understanding. Where does eShram stand as of now? And I want to focus your attention to the issues of migrant workers, because yes, there might be informal sector workers, but there's a huge, and there might be a huge overlap, but I want you to focus on the concerns of the migrant workers. So let me start with Chandan, with whom I believe has some slides also with him to share his experience. Chandan, would you kick off the discussion?
Yeah, thank you so much, Udit ji. I wish, first of all, I express my deepest gratitude to Media and Express for organizing this fascinating panel. I think it's very, very important. We have been following all your previous panels, and it's very, very educative and very, very learning. So thank you so much. Congratulations to all of you for putting this together. So very quickly, I wish Minister could have been virtually present so that we could have conversation with him instead of doing this kind of conversation. Then we could have asked some difficult questions directly to him. But anyway, it's okay, fine. So I think I just want to basically understand that what Minister was trying to talk about. I want to showcase something quickly with the 2-3 slides, that what exactly means of eShram and what eShram entails when we talk about the social security programs, and what exactly the eShram is offering to us at this moment. So very quickly, Working People's Coalition, we are the coalition of the workers' organizations, and one of the solutions as part of the COVID crisis that we have set up the National Helpline of the Workers along in collaboration with Ajivika Bureau. We have set up this helpline, Udit ji, in 5 cities at this moment: Bangalore, Hyderabad, Mumbai, Delhi, and Lucknow. And we have overwhelmed with thousands of calls. And you won't believe that we have recovered 1.6 crores rupees in just 6 to 8 months' time, which could have lost as a wage theft by the informal worker. So that's like a small success. I can talk more about that, but just very quickly, that what exactly the minister was talking about. eShram data says 27.5 crore workers, which is correct. This is the data, I saw this today. And if you see that, that is India's commitments to the social security. This is ILO convention, just for the people who don't understand, and who, for the layman, International Labour Organization has set down some agenda, set down some indicators. What does it mean, the social security? And you can see that the 9 indicators: medical benefit, sickness, unemployment, old age, employment injury, family, maternity, invalidity, and survivor benefits. And you know, a lot of people are not aware about that India has already achieved it through the 3 legislations which came immediately after independence, which are EPFO, Employment Provident Fund Organizations, ESIC, which is Employees State Insurance Corporations, and Employees Compensation. As you can see the tick mark that the ESIC covers so-and-so benefits, Provident Fund covers so-and-so benefits, and Employees Compensation covers so-and-so benefits. So you can see that India has already achieved. Now the whole discussion that the laws and statutes which were enacted particularly to provide benefit as entitlements to the organized sector, the whole challenge about to extend it to the informal sector workers. Next slide, please. And now in the next slide, you can see, next slide. Yeah, now you can see that what are the central government schemes covered under eShram. So you saw that India's commitment, international commitments, I have also showcased that India has achieved those social security. Now I want to call this as a buffet. The buffet which government of India is offering under eShram. And you see that medical benefit, the same indicators, and I tried to explain that the Prime Minister, some Yogi Yojana, Mandhan Yojana, Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana, so Atal Pension Yojana, this is like a different kind of scheme, just covering these social security indicators in kind of bits and pieces, which I would call it as very, very charity-led approach instead of rights. Government of India should have been, implemented the social security program, which came from the workers' movement, which came from the very strong trade union movement. It has a very, very great history about that. But diluting that, and they're offering this, which workers don't have belief, which workers don't even understand that, which benefit they will take, which benefit they will not take. So next slide, I just quickly tell you what exactly is this. So you see that all the schemes, the Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandhan Yojana, which offers 3,000 rupees after 60 years, pension scheme offer 3,000 rupees after 60 years. So most of these social security programs are for those workers who can contribute some money, who can contribute some, kind of resources, and they can get it and they can achieve it. Next slide, please. So again, this is like a whole plethora of schemes. It's like so many things. And it is so, I would say that it is very fragmented and it is very charity-led approach where workers are not even aware about it. So what I'm trying to say that what government of India is offering, you can close this. I mean, I just wanted to showcase you that you can see on the slides that what government is offering is not what working class movement or what the labor laws is offering. It has a historical pillar, it has a historical base. And what government is proposing is absolutely fragmented part. Workers don't need that. I give you a small example. RSBY came during the Congress regime, and a lot of millions of workers invested the money in that. Workers did not get any benefit. Now workers don't have any trust. Same with the health scheme, the health program. So I just want to make it very, very clear at this moment when you see all the other data. You recently saw the CMIE data or any PLFS data. There's a huge unemployment rate. Workers need unemployment benefits. Workers need a job. Workers need a social security. And there has to be some state-led programs on that. I just want to say one last thing and conclude. When the Modi government came to the power, they basically brought in the huge labor law reform agenda. Parliament has passed the law. Actually, what I just talked about the social security benefits in my first slide, it was there, Uditji, in the first draft. The first draft came in 2015. It talked about the 4 kinds of workers. One kind of workers like people like you and all of us who can pay their contribution to social security schemes. The second kind of workers who can pay 50% and their employers can pay 50%, which is existing model. The third model is that the entire contribution basically comes from the government on that. And one more contribution that the workers don't have any wages. People who are earning less than the minimum wages, then the government, the state will make the contribution on behalf of the workers. So I don't know why they diluted it when it was there in the first draft. And when the parliament passed all the labor law reform, all the labor codes during the COVID time, everything got diluted. So I think it's a huge betrayal, it's a huge distrust, and it's a huge shocking, blow to the working class, which you said 400 million internal migrants. I would call it that 50 crores, 50 crore desh ke mazdoor. It's a huge, huge distrust and betrayal to those people. Thank you.
Thanks, Chandanji. So one of the things that I've sort of cottoned onto is that what you're saying is that there's a massive difference between a rights-led approach and a charity-based approach, where maybe the political executive decides on the whims and fancies of what to give and how much to give.
Correct.
The other thing that you mentioned is the fact that it's heavily fragmented, the framework in which these things are given or any social security is given.
Yeah.
Points noted, and we'll come back to them. But let me first again go to Divya. And Divya, if you could take a step back and also speak a bit about when we say social security, what do we mean by social security? I mean, many of our viewers would benefit from knowing exactly when we say this phrase social security, what exactly are we hoping to achieve? What are we trying, hoping the government would provide or the system would provide? And then share your own understanding of how far eShram has worked and what is happening on the ground as of now.
Yeah, thank you. Hello and good evening. Many thanks to Indian Express and Omniair for inviting me to this important platform. Apologies as I'm navigating through a very sore throat, but please bear with me. So I think just at the outset to address the question, Udit, I think social security and social protection really refers to the slew of schemes that Chandan had showed in his first slide, which includes old age pension, maternity benefits, accidental insurance, health benefits, medical kind of protection, both inpatient and outpatient kind of schemes for workers. And the main premise is that when we talk about informal workers and migrant workers, in whose cases the relationship with their employers is very difficult to be established, then the state has to essentially step in and provide these benefits to the workers. That's why this promise of social protection for informal workers and migrant workers is so important, and eShram, the promise of eShram is such a critical discussion at this juncture. Moving on, I think as a policy measure to advance the questions of identity and recognition of the vast informal workforce of the country, I think eShram is a welcome step. It's something that many activists like us have really demanded for a long time, and it also, we have to acknowledge that it really seeks to address a critical gap in data and estimates surrounding the informal and migrant workforce in the country. At least that's the objective, and that gap was really sorely felt during the COVID-induced lockdowns. There are several kind of progressive features. One is on self-registration, which is a big step forward, because now any informal worker can actually come forward and self-register himself or herself, just declare that they are part of the informal workforce. There's no need for any proof or employment certificate, because that's precisely what makes them an informal worker. There are also common service centers for workers to register themselves, and these are, we have to acknowledge that these are thoughtfully kind of designed for inclusion of the workforce. But at the same time, I would also like to really highlight some very structural, basic, fundamental kind of critiques of the design and architecture of eShram, from the perspective of migrant workers that we've been working with across the country. So Chandan also alluded to the history of, this enumeration exercises. There was the Unorganized Worker Social Security Board, that was initiated in 2008. There was the UN card, the Unorganized Worker Identification Number, that was, initiated in 2015. A lot of these schemes and cards and platforms really sought to do the same thing, that is enumerate migrant workers and informal workers and link them to social security schemes, and nothing much really came in the name of social protection for workers through such drives. So it's not really clear how this exercise is drastically different from any of its predecessors. Chandan also spoke about how this is not backed up by a statutory legislation. It's not a legally mandated entitlement that the workers can then hold the state and the employers accountable for. This means that informal workers are already quite disempowered on many frontiers, do not really have any means of ensuring a guaranteed registration or access to social protection through eShram. And migrant workers are a more marginalized, more vulnerable segment of the informal sector workforce. They work in very bottom rungs of the sectors like construction, domestic work, factory work, in recycling, kind of small recycling units in major cities. And it's common knowledge that it's also disproportionately kind of represented by people from marginalized backgrounds like Dalits, Adivasis, OBCs, Muslims, women, transgenders. So it's a whole mosaic of people from marginalized backgrounds who really form this vast population that holds the country. But still the onus on access is actually placed on this already vulnerable community, and that's a very suboptimal design for inclusion. And in many places where we work, we know that in the apps where we are actually facilitating registration into eShram, we know that in the absence of a mediating entity like us, it would not be possible for workers to access this on their own, given the whole kind of digital divide. For example, in Pune, we were working with a group of women workers who come from Vidarbha, where they migrate seasonally to Pune to work in brick kilns in a very rural kind of industrial cluster in the outskirts of Pune. And for any kind of registration, access to eShram, it requires having a mobile number, having an Aadhaar card, having a bank account, having one consistent number that is linked to both the Aadhaar and bank accounts, and being able to verify the same with an OTP, ensuring that the spellings of the names spelled in English are actually consistent across all of these, bank accounts / eShram / PAN card, Aadhaar card, all of this. And these are things that many of us take for granted, but these are really unsurmountable challenges for all the migrant workers out there. And especially if you talk about the gender question, many women actually do not have bank accounts. They don't even have an identity as a worker themselves. They are just attached to their husband's kind of accounts. They don't even own mobile phones for them to receive an OTP and kind of verify that. So the digital divide and how the various layers of marginalized identities really compromise the access to eShram. I think that needs to be really thought through. And coming to the current framework of social security that governs the social security code that was introduced in the parliament, that's not yet been fully implemented. It still maintains the dichotomy between informal and formal workers. So if an informal worker who's employed in an enterprise that employs less than 10 people, then the employers are not mandated to give them access to ESIC or PF. And that really leaves out vast segments of informal sector workers. And there is even in this segment, migrant workers disproportionately work in such small, very tiny, very marginal subsistence level units in industrial clusters in the peripheries of the city. So anyway, they are excluded from these employer mandated kind of provisions. But eShram does not do anything to root these employer mandated provisions through these registrations. It only offers, like Chandan was saying, very fragmented, insurance policy here and a medical benefit there, in a very fragmented way that does not really seek to establish the employer-employee relationship in this case. So instead of rethinking a way to really universalize social security, this is just, or instead of a way to provide a pathway from informality to formalization, such provisions are not even part of the promise of eShram. Nobody's even talking about it. So I think the minister also alluded to the linkage between One Nation, One Ration card and eShram. I think that's a promising kind of step. But right now, on the ground, One Nation, One Ration card, its implementation is extremely patchy. So it's not at all clear how these two databases are going to be linked, how these policy architecture will actually speak to each other. Similarly, with the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act, this is an act that is a single piece of legislation that governs the movement of migrant workers in the country. But that also calls for a registration when workers move from one state to another. But how will these registrations be different? If it's registered on eShram, will there be an overlap with ISMW? All of these are important policy questions that are not yet clear. So yeah, I think these are some of the structural kind of critiques that I wanted to highlight, and I'll stop here and look forward to the discussions.
Thanks, Divya. So you made some very insightful points. One, obviously, the fact that we've had past episodes where we've enumerated a lot of workers, but really not got anywhere after that enumeration. And then the fact that, again, there is no legal backing to many of the provisions that we're talking about. And one thing that we often forget, blind as we are to the problems that migrant workers might feel, who, as you mentioned, are perhaps the most marginalized, is that getting an OTP and verifying everything across board, across states, is an insurmountable challenge, as simply put as that. And the onus is still perhaps on the migrant worker to somehow do it, which may or may not happen. And what happens if they don't step up for whatever reason? So we'll again circle back to some of these things. Govind, you had something to say. You wanted to say something that. So let me go back to the order, and I would like to invite Mr. Asif Sheikh, who works with Jan Sahas, also again to share his experience on on eShram, where what is his understanding till now? As Chandan mentioned, there are a lot of responses to the helpline that he mentioned, but your own experience as somebody working on the field.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for this opportunity and thanks to organize this kind of like conversation about the migration issue. And as per my understanding, we all saw the invisibility of migrant worker during the pandemic, like the first wave and the second wave. And I think during that period, we realized in India, we haven't any kind of system to like provide a social registry of the migrant worker to the government or any other authorities if the migrants are in the difficult situation, so we can basically help. So that kind of system not exists before the eShram portal. And I think that visibility is providing by this system. So various kind of like the issues and challenges are there with the eShram portal, but still this system is basically trying to create a social registry of unorganized sector workers. And within the unorganized sector worker, the migrant population is more vulnerable, more visible, more invisible. And this kind of system basically gives some kind of like the power and some kind of like the visibility. So I welcome this like the initiative from the government. Some issues are there, and the previous speaker shared various kind of like the issues and challenges. And basically the one big challenge is how we can connect the worker through the eShram portal with the social security benefit. And basically in my organization, after the like the first wave, we started a collaborative called Migrant Resilience Collaborative. And currently we are working across 100 districts of India. So 80 basically the high migration or like the source district, and the 20 destination district or cities. And basically we also started a process to register these workers before the eShram portal. So that system called Jan Sathi. And basically after registration of the workers, basically we try to generate a report for each and every household, how many like the social security, this particularly like the family is eligible for how many social security benefit. And basically the field team facilitating the like the application for the social security benefits and delivery of the social security benefit. And basically their role is mostly like the facilitation of the processes. So as of now, we register about 2.5 million workers in this platform. And out of these 2.5 million household, about 2 million household receive one or like multiple social security benefit in the last like 16 or 18 months. So basically we have some kind of like the experience with the technology, with these kind of system. And we strongly realize if eShram portal can add multiple social security benefit, so this system can create a single window system for the migrant population as well as the unorganized sector worker. So from my perspective, basically registration is a one thing. So we can register like 20 crore or 25 crore or 40 crore worker, but registration is a first step. But after that, how we can reduce the vulnerability of the community through the social security benefit, that's a very, very important thing for me. So basically, we are using this system, and we are very much open to share our system with the government. Currently, we are working with multiple state governments such as Telangana and Chhattisgarh. And these states, we also register about 4.12 lakh workers in the eShram portal. And process, like some challenges are there, but still workers are very much interested to register under the eShram portal. And actually in India, government launched various kind of program. So for example, one program is a BOCW, and BOCW is also for the construction worker. And as we know, the number of workers, like the migrant worker as well as the unorganized sector worker in the construction sector in India is very high. So we have about 5 to 9 crore like the workers in the construction industry or infrastructure industry. But still, like we only register about 5 crore workers in the last like the 2 or 3 decades. So I think in the eShram portal, workers are very much interested, but how we can provide the support to the worker, and basically in some villages, like the bank account is a one issue, like the Aadhaar card is an issue, mobile phone is an issue, but workers are still trying to manage these challenges. and they want to register under the eShram portal. And I think now the job of the government and the civil society organization, not-for-profit organization and others, how we can ensure like the facilitation of benefit to the worker. One another thing we also realize, most of the time, like the government and as like the previous speakers shared, the common service center is providing various kind of like the facilities for the migrant worker and unorganized sector worker as far as the eShram is concerned. But I think the role of industry is also very important. And basically, as of now, only in some states, industry participated in this process, but we need to increase their participation. So that's one very important thing. The second very important thing about the utilization of BOCW funds. So in construction industry, BOCW boards collected lots of like the financial resources, but the distribution of the financial resources or utilization of financial resources is another big challenge. And we need to link the eShram portal with the BOCW like this scheme. That would be a big step. So I think various kind of things are there where we can use this data. One another thing, as Minister shared, about the portability. So one nation, one ration scheme is a very beautiful scheme, particularly for the migrant workers. But the problem is how we can link with the worker, how we can increase the awareness within the migrant community. So if we can link ONOR and the eShram portal and the BOCW, that would be also provide lots of support to the community. So these are the major points from my side. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Sheikh. Some very optimistic views coming from you on how it can actually be solved. Many of these problems that are that have been plaguing the system for a long time. Let me come to Mr. Sanjay Awasthi, who looks at migration in a very specific manner. He's involved with the International Organization for Migration, heads the India office. Mr. Awasthi, what has been your sense about, I mean, the last 2 years in particular, India's internal migration has been in news for a variety of reasons. When you look at eShram, how do you sort of envisage how far would it help, and in what way can it help, and what's happening on the ground in your understanding?
Thank you, Mr. Udit. Indeed, a pleasure hearing from other speakers, especially based on their hands-on experience dealing with eShram. And it was really heartening to hear the Honorable Minister speak about the immense potential which eShram offers, in addition to what we have seen till now. A very good evening to all of you. Let me first extend my appreciation to the Indian Express for hosting this event. And coming to eShram, since it was launched almost 9 months ago, it's an opportune juncture to focus on its mandate and potential it offers for the benefits of workers in the informal sector, and the large majority of that category comprises of the migrants. And with nearly 400 million classified as internal migrant workers, 68% of them being women, interstate migrants needs a special focus. They are an integral part of our economy and society. And I'll just give you an example. As per the 2011 census, the migrant population in Tamil Nadu alone increased by 98% between 2001 and 2011, with almost 43% of the state's population considered as migrants. So migration hence plays a very crucial role in the pace and patterns of India's development. And as the economists would agree with all of us that the South Indian states are currently one of the major drivers of the Indian economy, and they also host one of the largest sections of Indian migrants from across the country. And according to the latest periodic labor force survey from 2021, which is just last year, 90% of India's workforce is in the informal sector. So we all recognize the importance. Informal workers, which are also called unorganized workers, in rural and urban areas were the ones hit the most during the pandemic. We have all seen the visuals. You also projected it in the beginning of this webinar. Primarily because of the seasonality of their employment and lack of formalization. And the question is, who is an unorganized worker and what is the unorganized sector? Let me briefly deal with this. This includes a large range of workers such as agriculture workers, Manrega workers, fishermen, milkmen, migrant workers, gig workers, platform workers, street vendors, domestic workers, and other workers engaged in similar occupations. And one of the major challenges during the pandemic was the lack of comprehensive information on migrant workers and workers in the informal sector across the country. And I want to draw everybody's attention to very high significance of data. Data, even before the government or any other stakeholder wants to move forward, it's really important to get a good grasp over the data. And that was the biggest challenge in terms of dealing with the needs and problems of people in the migrant workers during the pandemic. So launched in 2021, the objective of the portal, apart from developing a comprehensive database, was also to improve the implementation and integration of social security services, which the minister highlighted and articulated very well in his address, and it has been underlined by other panelists also. And with registration of almost 28 crore workers, it comprises 2/3 of the informal sector workers in the country. More than half are from the agriculture sector, followed by workers in the manufacturing sector, and then the construction workers. So let me highlight the significance of eShram. That's what, and the kind of potential it offers in not only supporting the migrant workers, but also the Indian economy. First, the linking of surveys conducted by the Labour Ministry, such as the Periodic Labour Force Survey and All India Migrant Workers Surveys, eShram is an excellent example of the much needed harmonization to capture the granularity of migration process across the country. Second, the portal also enables sharing of information on registered migrant workers with various stakeholders such as the ministries, departments, boards, agencies, and organizations of the central and state governments. For instance, the portal has so far registered over 400 occupations, which offers an excellent opportunity to link it up with the independent initiatives taken by several state governments. We know when UP took initiative, Gujarat took initiative, Maharashtra took initiative, Jharkhand, Bihar, several state governments during the pandemic, providing employment opportunities, connecting them with the potential employers. It was also good to note that the Honorable Minister alluded to this potential in his address just now, in terms of its future possibilities. Third, such crucial information can also be available to prospective employers and employees, thereby bridging the supply and the demand gap across the country. So many such initiatives in terms of linking up the employers and the employees were taken by the state governments. This is a good opportunity to link them up all to a national level database like eShram. Fourth, the same information could also facilitate the re-employment of Indian migrants returning from overseas during the pandemic. I was happy to note that the minister alluded to this when he mentioned the linking it up with e-Migrate portal, which primarily deals with immigration check required passport holders who are in the most urgent need of this kind of support because they had to return from various overseas employment, resulting in very difficult situation for them. And it can also go a long way in bridging the gaps in returning migrants' access to social security benefits. Including a database of returned migrants according to their skill and experience can meet the human resource demands of companies and sectors on Indian soil as well as abroad. Fifth, with ever increasing contribution of women, I just now mentioned 68% of these workers are women. We need to have a much better understanding of the needs and problems of women migrants. eShram offers an excellent opportunity for us to collectively do so. So we need to realize that potential with this diverse set of information which is already being collected through the portal. And last but not the least, I was happy to hear from Ashif, bearing in mind that the fact that the private sector is the largest employer of migrant workers, a proactive involvement of the private sector and the civil society would go a long way in realizing the fullest potential of eShram and thus realize the goal of leaving no one behind, as we say in the International Organization for Migration. So thank you once again, Mr. Udit, and thanks everybody in the panel and the audience. Look forward to being a part of the rest of the webinar.
Thank you, Mr. Avasthy. That was a very comprehensive understanding of what the promise of eShram is. I would like to now bring in Mr. Govindraj Etiraj. Govind has been the founder of India's Pen, and more significantly, he's a senior journalist who's looked at many policy changes. And so, Govind, if I might ask you to, one, reflect on the crisis that we saw in 2020, immediately after the lockdowns were announced, and what it how it impacted, and then reflect on the whole eShram initiative, and what do you make of it? Where do you think the promise lies, and what do you think might be the iffy bit as things stand now?
Udit, thank you very much for having me on today. I think that the lockdown and the migration we saw at its highest intensity between March and May 2020, or April and May 2020. I mean, even the official figure acknowledges more than 11 million migrant workers on the roads. As you know, almost 970 people died. Not related to COVID, as in they died because of the sheer, let's say, troubles that they faced along the way, and including many who died in trains that they were going back. I think we've done a lot of reporting on this subject, but most of it has been in 2021. It actually feels strange when you look back. The 2 years have passed, though it also feels like all of this happened very, almost like yesterday. So the eShram portal is a very good, I think, a defensive response to what happened in 2020, though it started working only in August 21 or September 21, and seems to have enrolled at a fairly furious pace. If you look at the data, it was almost nothing in September 2021, and then the months of January and February saw huge enrollment. I mean, I really don't know how and why, but that's when it really happened, and it seems to have petered off now. The last few months are seeing only about an enrollment of 100,000, 150,000 a day. So whatever the trigger was is maybe not there. Maybe the trigger is also when we see more cases, there is more uncertainty. I'm talking about COVID cases, and maybe people register. I think there are 2 or 3 things which maybe I can point to, and also acknowledging fully that everyone who's spoken before me, and rightly so, has covered every important aspect of this, both the negative and the positive. I think the fact that this database exists today and is constantly growing is a great start. The important point, as I think Ashif mentioned earlier, is what do you do with this database? How do you dive deeper into it? What are the kind of analytics you can bring out? The second thing is how do you link this database to more and more services, benefits, and database points, as one may call it, and including the private sector. Now, obviously, the government is not solving that problem, and maybe it's not the government's problem, because the government is only offering the net to those who lose their jobs and so on. But I think, as again was pointed out just now, I think the question of how do we use this database to find out who has the right skills for what is a very, very critical input that people should, and that's also been thought about and suggested. I mean, for example, you may say there are 55 million construction workers, but every construction worker is not the same. Some construction workers are, let's say, masons. Some are, work with wood. There may be others who are, more artisanal, and and figuring out all of that today is done really by intermediate level contractors and so on. So if you had all of this in a database which you can access with all the other data points on, let's say, their bank account numbers, or and of course their social security details, and that obviously and potentially would make their life simpler and make them accessible and more visible to the job creation system. I mean, I've been a financial journalist all my life, so I'd always think of these problems first as a jobs problem and a private sector problem, and the government sort of coming later to, like I said, provide the net if things go wrong. To that extent, I think, as I think Chandan pointed out as well, that I mean, more than half half the people who could be potentially employed are not at this point. So about 450 million people in this country are not looking for a job, even though they could be. So that's a more fundamental problem, and this database is not really going to solve that. And eventually, I think you will, or we will have to solve the jobs problem, even as we make sure that as people are exposed to shocks like this, there is a net that protects them, and we should think of this simultaneously. The minister, I think, talked about how, and I guess the digital approach takes care of a lot of integration issues much more easily. Adding the skilling, using the database for hiring. The interesting thing that he didn't mention, and I don't know whether it's worth talking about, is voting. If you have all this technology and you have the ability to authenticate remotely, then why not introduce voting as well? I mean, if you are 275 people already, million people already who are not in the place where they are, or have to go back only to vote. And if you're saying there are over 380 million potential migrant workers, then I think we should think about voting as well, because that's an important right. And to me, at least from a technology standpoint, there's nothing that can stop us or prevents us from introducing voting. So if you bring in voting, you bring in the right social security benefits which provide the net, and essentially ensure that a migrant worker does not feel migrant. That I may have moved to Mumbai for a job or Bangalore for a job, southern states, which are clearly the engine. But that doesn't mean I have to feel like an outsider, because everything I could have done back home, I can do here today. And that's really how I think we should approach this. So I'm going to pause there, Udit. I really don't have much more to say. And I think this is the discussion on this is an important one. And using technology and, of course, a great degree of empathy for those who've suffered and hopefully will not suffer again will go a long way in making this country more productive.
Thanks, Govind. You hit upon two very fundamental things and we've talked about this in the series earlier. One is the issue of livelihoods. There is no getting away from that. The unemployment crisis that we are seeing, not today, but almost now for 4 or 5 years, that has to be addressed for any sustainable solution. You simply cannot imagine that only social security or any kind of government toll will solve the problem, at least at this scale, the scale that at which it happens in India. And the other thing that you mentioned is also quite remarkable, the issue of voting. It may not seem like the issue directly related to social security, but from the very first episode, I think we've been highlighting this, and some of the experts on migration in India have been saying that the chief problem is the political insignificance that migrants have. Their vote doesn't count in their home state, and their vote doesn't seem to count, or obviously is not relevant in the destination state. And when we are talking in terms of migrants, even India's internal migrants, which perhaps would make the second, third, or fourth largest country in the world just by numbers, that's a huge miss. And everything starts from that political representation. Unless voting happens, you will not see any real change. So both are very valid points. We are running out of time. So what I'll do is that before we take up some question and answers, 2 minutes literally to each member to give us, what you think, 1 or 2 or 3 points that you think eShram must do urgently and necessarily for it to really achieve the purpose that the minister started off with of, not leaving anyone behind, providing social security and support to the most vulnerable. So I'll start with the same sequence and go to Chandan first, but specifically just 2 minutes and make it as brief and crisp as you can.
Thank you, Udit. I think Govind Rajji has, kind of reminded us of like horrible memories of the 2 years. I mean, I mean, I don't know what really changed in the last 2 years. I mean, 2 days before the Mundka fire and the 40 workers murdered by the system, who's accountable for this? So when I recall the horrific incident of the Aurangabad, the workers died on the railway tracks to, just 2 months before, we were all together in the fact-finding mission in Pune at the construction site. I saw the blood spill over on the ground. And then this to Mundka, Express did a fantastic reporting of the workers. All migrant workers died. I don't know what really changed and what really we are seeing on that. Somebody has to be responsible for these killings and murders. We are saying the workers are part of the national security, the economic growth and progress and etc. And they are being killed and murdered like this, and nobody is responsible about that. I think it's a very, very sad and disappointing moment for people like us who are working on the ground. But having said that, I mean, the couple of basic questions I would like to raise. I mean, while talking to all of you, I just got a message from my couple of colleagues like Shram Sena that 14,000 Shramik e-card hum logon ne banaye hain. But what is basically the next step? Is government is going to give any benefit? Yes, government is taking a political stand. Before the UP elections announced, just 2 hours before the UP election, they transferred 1,000 rupees to the 2 crore workers account. Yes, government is doing it. They are doing the political act, but they are not ready to commit any entitlements and the rights to the worker. That's the basic question we need to ask, that this government is going to give them their social security due. If you really want to give something, you have a data of 27 crore workers. Let's start with the ESIC. Give them the ESIC. What are you waiting for that? People like us can have already submitted a detailed financial proposal, structural proposal, that how you can give to each and every workers. Udit ji, we have a huge money. We are bailing out to huge corporations, big corporates. They are looting our money and flying away from our country. What government is waiting for that? We can propose some tax reform caution where the money can be raised. So I just want to say that on the policy paralysis, because Divya talked about it, Niti Aayog formulated a policy. It is in Thanda Bastar. Nobody knows what government is going to do with the Niti Aayog policies. It had a great plan. I mean, I know that Ajivika Bureau was part of formulating that Niti Aayog policy. Nobody knows about that. Chhattisgarh, Telangana, Madhya Pradesh, they all formulated the migrant workers policy. Nobody knows about that, where those policies stand as of today. Similarly, for the urban employment, sorry Uditji, I can't hear you because you're on mute.
I'm saying specific to eShram, what are one or two, if you could help us out on that specific.
Yes. So just concluding, because this is a larger question. Without understanding and dealing with it, we can't understand eShram. There's 2 questions I would like to raise. The one question is that this whole issue is linked with the labor law reform, which is happening at this moment in this country. As Divya mentioned about interstate migrant workers, now government has increased the threshold. In the earlier law, there was a threshold of 5 workers, and any 5 workers, any establishment they work will recognize them as the interstate migrant workers. Now the threshold has increased to the 10 workers. Similarly, if you read the Industrial Dispute Act, now the threshold is 300. So technically, majority of the workers, it's not only about eShram. We have a huge database. Even before that also, there's a huge NREGA data, the PDS data. The data is not a big deal. Data is not the question. It's about that, do you have any political will to give rights to these workers who are part of national economy? I'm quoting the Government of India data. 60% of the GDP comes from the informal economy. What Government of India is returning to them? Those workers were part of your economic and the national growth. The whole question is that the kind of reform, the kind of laws you are passing, you are excluding all the workers. You are allowing workers to die because of industrial safety, the worksite safety, merely giving them cards and not ensuring their worksite safety, not ensuring social security will not help you. You need to have a clear political discussion. You need to have a very clear political bill. These small charity, 50 rupees pension, that card, those card, this benefit, that benefit is not going to solve the problem.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Now I'll come back to Divya again. Also again heard everybody speak, and from your own understanding, 1 or 2 things that you think pointed can help eShram. Speak as if maybe you were telling this to anybody who can in the government change anything. See if you can suggest 1 or 2 things.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. So I think one important thing would be, to mandate the participation of industry and employers in enrolling their informal, temporary, and casual workers. These are the major kind of segment that needs focus. That will be a critical step forward, I think. And using that to establish employer-employee relationship and root, provision social security benefits like Provident Fund, ESIC, which are mandated to be provided by the employers, legally mandated to be provided by employers, routing such benefits through the eShram registration route. I think that will, make a huge difference in making a lot of informal workers on the pathway to formalization. We work with several industrial leaders in Pune through an initiative called the Social Compact, which you also covered a few weeks ago. And many employers are really forthcoming in, enrolling workers. So, but this will really need to be mainstreamed as a legal mandate, I think, ideally led by the principal employers to all the vendors in their ecosystem, in their supply chains. More operationally, I think, expanding the coverage of common service centers, enabling gram panchayats, labor offices, worker facilitation centers, trade unions, conducting exclusive camps. Right now, people don't have any trust or information about the benefits of eShram. So I think expanding that through a massive kind of drive would be really useful. So and it can also incentivize more registration into the scheme. And lastly, I think on the lines of a helpline that we've been running jointly with the Working People's Coalition, a widely publicized, responsive helpline system that can help people address inquiries, give information on the benefits of eShram. I think that would be really important.
Right. I suppose those the point that you mentioned earlier about taking away the onus from the workers themselves to sort of step up. Mr. Sheikh, what do you have to say for maybe one or 2 points? You had some fantastic points on how to improve it, but can you just tell us what more would you like eShram to do or add for migrant workers?
Yeah. So I think if we can add all the social security benefit in the eShram portal, that would be really, really helpful for the workers, because currently our system is not very compatible with these schemes, and we have like thousands of schemes. Each and every state implement their own scheme, so lots of complications are there. So I think some system we required as a nation where we can add these scheme with the eShram. That's the first point. The second point, how we can use the eShram as a single window system for the unorganized sector worker and the migrant worker in the country. The third point is currently we are using the technology, but we need like the common service center, we need some facilitation support. So workers are not independently able to use the technology. So if we can add some element in this current technology, or we can create a people's friendly technology, so workers can directly use this system. The fourth point is how we can use this like the whole system to create more inclusion, because still lots of workers left out from this process. So and for that include like the multiple stakeholders engagement is required. And my last point is this whole technology, eShram and many other things going on, this issue is not only related to the registration or related to the social security benefit. This issue is related to the dignity and respect of the worker. And I think no any tech platform can serve or solve that problem, and no any government can solve that problem, because as a country, as a community, we also need to think about the pain, about the issues of the migrant community, and then communities can also proactively support the other like the fellow citizen. So that kind of idea is also very important. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that ties in with what Divya was saying, that more people have to get involved. We can't just let it be done by the government and hope the government will solve all problems. Mr. Awasthi, what are your concluding remarks on this?
Thank you. I would like to highlight three major points. The first one is need to ensure a good focus on women-specific needs and problems. In this context, that's really critical. The second one is we need to bear in mind the huge migration pattern which runs from north to south, east to south. So there is, of course, it has a pan-India significance, but then there is a more urgent need to attend to these vulnerabilities of these migrant workers in the states where they are mainly concentrated. especially the interstate migrant workers. And the third point is involvement of the private sector. My friends have already highlighted this, and I want to underline this aspect that how important it is, because that's where the real opportunities are, whether good or bad or whatever. But then the private sector needs to be on board in terms of helping them realize their access to social security benefits and other entitlements.
Thank you. Govind, last word to you. The issue of private sector, which started off with you on the employment side, has now come a full circle with Divya, Asif, and Mr. Avasti, everybody pointing out the role that we need to go beyond just the government, and other parts also have to come into play. And Mr. Sheikh also talked about the dignity of workers. You're concluding.
No, I think the human aspect is the most important aspect. And that is what really struck us so harshly in those 3 months of 2020. More than perhaps even the impact of the virus, because at least in 2020 we didn't feel it so much. We have to only remember that countries like China are still going for a zero COVID approach, and the sheer devastation that's causing on their own economy and the workforce. And to that extent, I think we've perhaps learned the lessons quickly enough not to enforce bans, and also understand, hopefully, and in future, that such bans will not serve the purpose that they're supposed to, and maybe end up with more problems. I think 3 points, just to go back to what I was saying earlier. One is, how do we keep mining the data that we are collecting? If let's say we have 300 billion registrations in a few months, then how do we mine it in an active, intelligent way, so that we know what's happening? Where are the registrations happening? What are the shifts that we are seeing, if at all? Secondly, which links to that point, can it be more interactive? Can people actually interact with this database and leave feedback in some way on what is going on in their lives? I mean, do they have a job? Do they not have a job? Why did they lose their job? Have they gone back to their hometown, if they have, or have they come back? Is it possible? And all of that data can directly and more actively inform public policy, whether in the context of jobs, employment, overall macroeconomy. The third, of course, I mentioned it earlier as well, is really how do you create a more electoral empowerment? Like I said, I think from a technology standpoint, there is nothing that prevents linking, assuming our election commission databases are clean or are being cleaned up, nothing that really prevents the linking of that with Aadhaar, with eShram, and therefore allowing people to vote from wherever they are in the country. And that, I think, would be the ultimate step.
Right. Thanks a lot. So I think let's quickly dip into a few questions. I think there's time for maybe 2-3 questions. Could we patch through Ms. Harshita Sinha? I think she's from London School of Economics. Can you please ask your question, or also tell me who you want to ask this question to? And please be brief. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Harshita. I'm a PhD researcher working on migration and looking into a lot of the things that the speaker spoke about. And my question is addressed to everyone in the CSO space specifically. One is the question of registration that that eShram is doing in a lot of other schemes that is happening. But the step ahead of that is that in your experience, what are the manners or ways in which the government informs the workers, especially migrant workers, about how to access those schemes? Not merely the registration process, but also how to take and claim those benefits. In your experience, what are the means and methods that that you're seeing on ground? One is what the CSO is doing, but also in your experience on ground, what is the state doing in response to creating awareness about how to claim the different entitlements that are coming into place? If you could reflect on that, please.
Thanks, Harshita. Divya, would you want to take a stab at this?
Yeah, sure. So I think there are definitely sporadic efforts by the Labour Department to publicize the scheme, but I would say given the sheer magnitude of the workforce in the country, these are not nearly enough. So my reflections are basically that these are really woefully inadequate. The kind of publicity that the scheme has received. I mean, people do understand that it's important to register. It's something that has come up for workers, but it's not very clear to them what the benefits of eShram are. And as many panelists also discussed, the actual benefits are yet to be realized. Registration se kya hoga? That is not very clear to workers right now. So it really calls for more focused worker education and also more clarity from the side of the government as to what really will it lead to. As some of the speakers highlighted earlier, there is very less trust in many of these databases. There was Aadhaar, now there's eShram, and there are these PAN card. There are so many million databases that especially the poor people are required to be enrolled into for every single access to a government scheme. So where there is just no trust left anymore in the system. So I think it's important for the government to step up and highlight what is the imagination, what is the vision for the scheme, and then bring workers and other stakeholders on board.
Thanks, Divya. Next, we have Mr. Kumar Ratan. I think he's from Madhya Pradesh State Policy and Planning Commission.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Basically, I have 3 suggestions, and we are also working on this, how to go ahead with eShram. Based on also my experience of working in northeastern part of India and people with disabilities. So first suggestion would be like eShram portal and the registration process should be made accessible to people with disabilities as well. There are a number of people with disabilities with whom we have worked, and they are like, missing, unable to access this portal. That is one. Secondly, based on my experience in working with Mizoram, Nagaland, Manipur and Tripura, I have seen that in the remotest part of this country, there is very, almost no awareness about eShram portal and registration. That is second point. We need to reach out to those people in a very, conducive way. And third point, which other speakers have already said, that there should be more tangible benefits, as my previous speaker said, after registration on eShram portal. And I think we are also looking forward to get the list of recommendations out of this eThank conference. If we have access to those recommendations, I think we can take it up and discuss at with a larger group in our Policy and Planning Commission at Madhya Pradesh. So looking forward positively to get some important suggestion and recommendation, so that on behalf of Madhya Pradesh State Planning Commission, we can deliberate upon this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. That's a very generous offer. I think we can just move to the next question. I think this is by Mr. Pravesh Kumar from Delhi School. I think there's some delay. Let me ask something that came elsewhere, another question that came elsewhere. This is about whether street vendors are ready to pay. Somebody is asking, street vendors are ready to pay for ASIC, and can that facility be provided to street vendors who have an eShram card? Would anybody in the panel know that?
Yeah, of course. Can I? Yeah,
please.
So, of course, during the COVID time, the Prime Minister announced Swar Mandhan Yojana. Under that, the street vendors were given 10,000 rupees. That's like one of the scheme. But the street vendors union and street vendors organization said that we want social security benefits, which is meant for the organized sector workers, and they're happy to pay the eShram through the eShram. There's so many street vendors registered. They're happy to contribute for the social security benefits with it. So, as I said in the beginning, there's already a criteria designed by the government of India, by this government itself. And I don't know why they diluted while passing through the parliament. So any workers, it's not only the street vendors, any informal workers, they're happy to make a contribution in order to seek or access the social security benefits, as Divya said, ESIC, EPF, which is set as a standard social security entitlements.
Okay. Thanks a lot. There's one more question on the web that we've got. Is that are there provisions to extend state government welfare schemes to non-domiciled migrant workers using eShram? Will this process be fluid, for example, ranging from a few days to a few months as well? Will somebody answer that one? Whether their state government welfare schemes can be extended? Divya, Mr. Sheikh, anybody?
Yeah, I think that portability is part of the promise, and it's a big one if that is realized. Especially the One Nation, One Ration card, which promises, portability of food entitlements across, source and destinations. But as I said, these are very early days, and it's yet to be seen how these two, data systems will actually be linked to each other, and whether portability can be actually ensured. Right now, the implementation of the One Nation, One Ration card scheme on the ground itself is very patchy, and it's not the promise of it basically has not yet been realized. The fair price shop owners are not really on board, and they're always worried about the quota of food grains being depleted if they actually meet the demands of someone who's not part of their kind of catchment area. So there are several steps that are required to assuage the concerns of very critical stakeholders, and really work on the ground. Bringing stakeholders on the board is very important to ensure seamless interfacing between data systems as well. So I think it's not just a technological problem, it's also a political problem on the ground that to be addressed simultaneously.
Just want to add on this, Uditji, that this is also a problem of center-state relationship. I was in Tamil Nadu like a few weeks ago and talking to the Labour Secretary, and he said that the central government has not consulted with us. There's also the growing tension between center and state. For example, Tamil Nadu has the very old law called the Tamil Nadu Manual Labour Act. They have a multiple welfare board. They have multiple social security programs. They don't want to dilute it. For them, this is like a very basic identical question as far as the working poor is concerned. Now they don't want to merge it. They want to have a clarity that if eShram is going to roll out, what kind of social security schemes is going to be happen? Is there going to be any overlap? Is going to subsumed in that? There's a lot of confusion. Central government must reach out to a lot of state governments and clarify that what will be the future of these schemes, these state welfare board. Are they going to be alive? Are they going to be, existing even post this eShram era? So this is also a political question, as Divya said, which central government has to answer.
Right. Before we end, there is one question which I'm hoping Mr. Sheikh could join in and answer, and I would also wonder if Govind, you would want to step in and answer, because this is a typical, this is a question that has happened. Anybody who's covered Indian policy making would have encountered this. The question is, what are the ways to minimize inclusion and exclusion errors in such a portal? How does one verify whether a person is really from the informal sector or not? So first, Mr. Sheikh, and then would love to hear what Govind also has to say.
Yeah. So basically, it's a very interesting, the debate from last many years or decades in India about the inclusion and exclusion for the social security benefit. And I think here we can try our best to include everybody in this scheme and avoid to use any exclusion criteria, because most of the time when you add exclusion criteria, the actual the needy people basically exclude from the system. And even in the current system, the technology sometime like exclude some people, for example, because of phone number, because of the mobile phone. So various issues are still there, and I think government and industry and other stakeholders can come to like reduce the exclusion of the communities. And basically, we will not go into this debate, particularly as far as like the eShram portal is concerned. Yeah.
Yeah. So one approach always has been that, to avoid any kind of exclusion errors, don't focus on that bit and universalize as much as possible. And this is an old debate. I mean, Govind, this is the old debate. Even
I think we've spent decades focusing on exclusion. I think it's time we focused on inclusion. I mean, the cost of pinpointing exclusion. Look at any law. I mean, look at income tax laws. The amount of laws we create just to catch that one person who's going to maybe not pay some GST or something like that. And of course there will be someone, or there will be more people. But to catch that one person or 10 people, I mean, penalizing millions and increasing paperwork and putting all kinds of other pressures. I mean, I think we should get past that. It's a mindset problem. I mean, this is not a legal or a technical problem. I think it's time to get past that mindset.
Yeah, right. So with that, we'll end the panel discussion. But before we call it over for the evening, let me invite Ms. Shilpa Kumar from Umedyar India Network for her concluding remark.
Thank you to all the panelists, and Udit, to you as well. I just want to say that Indian Express thing kicked off about a year ago in Feb 21, and I think at least to my mind, it has actually since then we've seen 7 editions, all focusing on different aspects of what is really a very central issue. If I may, I just want to start off with what we heard in the first edition. It was really some very, I would say, critical points by not just elected representatives, but also industry and academicians about the need for data and technology as the starting point to really maybe look at this issue. And as we progressed, I think the discussions focused on the roles of state, the need for assistance centers, the need for services in destination areas, the centrality of government in delivering these services. And I think we also had an interesting session on how to mainstream a conversation where, I know, for example, on this webinar, we have people who are really, in a sense, committed to what is happening, but also how to, broaden the conversation to make sure that there is momentum built into it. As I kind of, look at, therefore, all of these conversations and then, bring it to where we are today, what strikes me is, the beginning of today's discussion, where the minister really talked about the government's intent of making eShram a place which can really document the entire community of migrant workers and document their origin, their workplace, and also potentially their social benefits and healthcare. And it's really, significant that at this point, when you go onto the eShram website, there are about 28 crore people registered on it, and this happened, as was pointed out, in 9 months. What really struck me, though, is from that first comments, when I think about, what all the panelists said, and it seemed to me like what was really pointed out is what's the opportunity to build on the base of this very important database that has got started. And what I heard was, first and foremost, the need for intermediaries, and there's no question, about it, for the digital divide really to be bridged. There is a need for intermediaries, and I think that got called out strongly by all the panelists. The opportunity also to then reduce vulnerabilities, linking them to more and more databases, I think that got called out as well. The opportunity for states to play a role, both to improve and strengthen this community, but also the opportunity to upskill the community into, better quality jobs. I think there was also the opportunity of really using the database to fine tune the specific issues faced, especially by women and children. And then the opportunity really for, actually employers, particularly in the private sector and in the smaller enterprises, to really play a very active role in registering workers that they employed. And last of all, I thought was the point made about the opportunity for this database itself to become more interactive and to enable richer insights which can help better execution and a better understanding of what's going on. And therefore, if I just kind of between the first and last discussions on this topic with Indian Express Think, I think I'm left with a feeling that since the pandemic, I think eShram has taken one step forward, a big step forward. But I think, like what was pointed out today, there are many opportunities to really engage as state, as employers, as intermediaries, as civil society organizations to take this to its logical conclusion. With that, thank you, and back to the Indian Express team.
Thank you, Shilpa, and many thanks to our presenting partner, Umidyar Network India, for helping us put this series together. Everyone who's joined us today, thank you very much. Good night.